I have brewed 2 batches of beer on the Brewtools B80 Pro, and I'm going to tell you about it coming up next. If you follow us on social media, you've seen me post things here and there about brewing on the B80, and I owe you guys a little bit of an explanation, and so that's what this video is. I want to try to give you everything that I've learned and my learning curve and everything so that you don't have to go through all the things that I did, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more success with your brew day, the first brew day that you do on this, and of course as you brew more and more, you learn a little bit more and you get a little more adept at using it. When I got the B80 Pro from Brew Tools, they told me, hey, you probably want to brew on it once just to get everything down and understand how everything works. And I said, yeah, no, I got this. I can do this. I brew on all kinds of stuff all the time. I can do it, no problem. So they're like, okay. So the first brew that I did was the KVEIK Ale, and got everything all set up, ready to go. And by the way, the chiller is set up wrong in this video, and we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. But Kelly was helping me out, got everything together, got the water together, got the grain together. Simple grain bill. I'll link up to the Brew Hardware recipe down below in case you want to brew this beer. So got everything together, got the water all heated up, got mashed in. Kelly helped me mash in on it. Everything was going good. Let it rest for a little bit. Turned on the recirculation at about, I think it was about 30%, and walked away for just a little bit. Shouldn't have done that. That's tip number 1, is don't walk away when you first start doing the recirculation, because what happened was the sparge stuck and it began to fill up the basket inside and it started overflowing. And when I came back, all the grain was overflowing into the main system, the main kettle, and it was just, and I don't have any footage of that because once that happened, it was kind of all hands on deck to save the beer and not film. But I can tell you, I spent forever taking this once we mashed out and scooping out all of the grain and bits and everything out of the kettle, which I still didn't get all of them out, but that was what I had to do in order to salvage that beer. The beer turned out really good. I mean, I hit all my numbers and everything. The boil off was what I expected. The numbers I hit were fine, but that's the first thing I want to tell you is do not walk away from the kettle when you start doing recirculation. The other thing that I learned from that particular brew day is that you need to mill your own grain, and it needs to be milled at like 1.2 millimeters. And that's what the guys at Brew Tools told me that I needed to do. So that was one of the things that I did not do. I ordered the grain from Morebeer and let them mill it however they mill it. I'm not sure what their mills are set to, but that's what I did with that first brew day. So one of the other things that happened in having the chiller hooked up wrong, I actually had the chiller hooked up where the beer or the wort was going through the water line area rather than going through the beer line area. And that was the one thing that they did have in their manual, was how to hook that up and how to do all that. And of course, I didn't pay any attention to that, just went and jumped into it and did it myself. So that's another tip for you. If you do get the system, make sure that you hook up the wort in and out on the small orifices on the front of the chiller and not to the side. And the reason being is because when I went to chill the beer down, everything got stuck. All that grain that was in there and all the, everything that was in the wort got stuck and it clogged up the chiller. So the problem with that was I could get a minimal flow out. I wound up having to transfer the beer at about 90 degrees or so into the fermenters. And as I said, everything turned out okay. If you've watched my yeast harvesting video, that is actually the beer that I brewed on the Brew Tools system. And so it turned out great. Came out nice and clear, no real chill haze or anything like that. And it tastes great. There's no evidence of a bunch of grain going into the wort. So that was my first experience. Fast forward to about a week ago, and I decided that I wanted to try to do a large beer on the system, a 5-gallon batch of about a 10 or 11% Imperial Stout. So I went ahead and ordered all my ingredients for that, and I ordered them unmilled because I do have a mill, and so I wanted to go ahead and set up the mill and mill it at the 1.2 millimeter and, the crush, and get everything the way that they said, because I learned the last time on the brew day that I did that, hey, if you have it too fine, it's going to get stuck, etc. I also hooked up the chiller correctly this time, so we started out with that. And that's another thing too. With this system, you can't be in a hurry, especially if you don't have a dedicated area to set it up, which I definitely would recommend, because the thing is really, really heavy. 54 pounds is no joke, lugging it around here and there. I mean, I move it around from time to time if I'm doing different things, and it's heavy, and it takes a while to set it up. If you set it up with the chilling system, with the chiller in line so that you can do a whirlpool to chill at the end of your brew if you get the chiller with the kit. The other thing is with the tri-clamps and all that stuff, it does get a little bit messy as far as water goes, so just be aware of that as well in setting it up. I mean, unless you have a pitcher or a jug or something right around everywhere, you can catch all the water and all that stuff when you're setting it up. It can be a little messy. Fortunately for me, I have a floor drain in the brewery here, so it's not too big of an issue, but just something to be aware of. I got all my water and grain and everything and did the recipe on the Brewfather app, and more on that in just a minute because there was a setting that I did not know you had to change before I did my brew day. So got everything ready, got all my water, got the grain, milled it, all that stuff, mashed in with it. And this time, whenever I went to do the recirculation, I actually did a slower speed. I started out probably about 18 or 19%, which was kind of a little bit of a trickle, but I wanted to make sure that everything was flowing and that everything was circulating good so that I didn't have the overflow problem that I did the last time. So I found that rate of recirculation was pretty good with that. It did rise up a little bit in the malt pipe, but it wasn't too bad. And the wort wound up, getting really clear. I did stir the mash about every 15 or 20 minutes or so. No problem with any of that. The other thing that I will tell you with the system is that you definitely want a winch system. The first brew that I did, it was a little difficult to pull the basket out. It was about 20 pounds of grain, somewhere around there, 23 pounds I think it was. I was able to pull it up out of there and hold it for a little bit so that it would kind of drain, and then raise it up the rest of the way and hang it on the sides of the kettle. And this batch that I had, for whatever reason, it seemed like it absorbed a little bit more water and wasn't releasing the water as quickly. And so I had to stand there and hold this thing, muscle it up out of there, really struggle to try to get it up onto the side. As a matter of fact, I only got 2 of the hooks on there, and then I had to wind up hollering for Kelly to come and help me and get the other hook on so that I could sit there and let it drain. In the meantime, as they say in the manual, that you got to be careful about that hoop on top, because I actually pulled it out of the side that was closest to me. And so it was kind of precariously dangling there on the end of the kettle and all that stuff. So just be aware, get yourself a winch. You got to have that if you're doing it. So once I got the wort all drained out of the basket, I came to the realization that I had a little bit too much liquid, because I was supposed to wind up with about 9 gallons and I wound up with about 11 gallons. And so I wasn't sure. I kind of blindly followed the Brewfather app, and I didn't realize that the profile was designed for bigger batches. And if you're going to do a smaller batch, you have to adjust one of the settings. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Thomas, the creator of Brewfather, said that it was the maximum mash size, I think it is. And I'll have to get with him to make sure and let you know. But that setting did not let me scale the recipe according to how much grain and water that I needed. So I wound up with 11 gallons of wort at like 1055, somewhere between 1055 and 1060. And the only thing that I could do at that point was just boil and boil and boil and boil. I think I boiled for about 3 hours, and it took a long time for it to boil. That's the next thing that I want to tell you, is that you got to make sure you have major ventilation, because it completely turned the entire basement into a sauna. I mean, there was water dripping off of all the AC ducts. I mean, it was pretty bad. I ran the dehumidifier for quite a while after I brewed this beer. Now, they are in the process of developing a steam condenser for it. They already have a lid that goes on that's like a cone shape with a round outlet at the top for you to be able to hook a hose up to your ventilation system. So hopefully they can come out with a condensing unit that's pretty simple and not too expensive for you to be able to actually use water to condense the steam and then run it down the drain. But that's something that's coming from them. But if you've purchased a unit and did not purchase that, just be aware that there is a lot of steam generated from it. Actually wound up boiling off too much and wound up with about 5 gallons in the kettle, which translates to about 4 gallons or 3.5 gallons in the fermenter. And I was over gravity. So I wound up having to add some water to it in order to reduce the original gravity. I was at like 1030, and then I wanted to be around 1015, something like that, or 1.115. So I wound up at like 1.111, and everything turned out okay. I mean, the other thing that I had an issue with was the chiller this time. Not really an issue, but something that you need to be aware of. With the chiller, it's not super efficient as some of the other chillers that are out there, and I talked to the creators of the Brew Tools system, And they could have done a convoluted pipe inside or something else to make it more efficient, but then you wouldn't have got as much of a whirlpool. So what they recommend is that you chill the wort in the kettle down to about 120 degrees, and then it's going to come out of the other end of the chiller at the proper temperature for you to pitch at. I did not realize this, so I kind of struggled with adjusting the pump, and I couldn't hardly get it to flow, and it was kind of being a little bit erratic with the temperature. But that's one of the things that I talked to them about, and they told me that after I brewed this. So I probably should have asked a few more questions before I brewed, but I wanted to kind of go with this alone and see if I could figure the system out. One of the other things I discovered in the first brew day is that the touchscreen is pretty sensitive. I actually dropped a little bit of water on the touchscreen, and as it ran down, it passed the pump slider. And when it passed the pump slider, it actually turned the pump up, which caused another overflow after I'd already had the first one. So be aware of that. Try to keep from dripping water on the screen while you're doing any kind of brewing, because it at least in my case, it did adjust the flow of the pump a little bit. So, you know, it's one of those things. I'm sorry I don't have more video. Both of the times that I brewed on it, it was just kind of a crisis mode, and I wanted to make sure that I saved the beer. The second time that I brewed, I really had a hard time practicing that relax, don't worry, have a home brew. But in the end, I did make beer. Good beer, I think. I haven't, you know, the stout's not done, it's still fermenting. But I was able to make beer on the system, and pretty much everything that I encountered were issues that I had. They weren't issues with the system. It was either me not knowing what I was doing with the system, or not having something, you know, correct, the milling of the grain or whatever. So the system is not as forgiving as some of those out there. It's a precision device, and there's some precise things that you need to do in order to use it. So hopefully this video helped you. I apologize for the delay in getting it out, but you know, if you enjoyed the information that I gave you, please give us a thumbs up. We certainly appreciate that. Hit the like button, subscribe, all the support. We certainly appreciate it. This has been Brian for Short Circuited Brewers. We'll see you on the next video.